309,000 barrels per day of refining capacity. Gone. California is losing 2 major refineries in less than 2 years. And it's not alone. Across America, refineries are shutting down or converting to other uses. Here are 10 states watching their fuel supply disappear. California is about to lose almost 1/5 of its gasoline production. 2 major refineries are closing, and the state might not recover. Phillips 66 shut down its Los Angeles refinery in October 2025. That facility produced 139,000 barrels per day. Then in April 2025, Valero announced it will close its Benicia refinery by April 2026. Another 145,000 barrels per day gone. Together, these closures eliminate 17% of California's refining capacity. The state will drop from 10 refineries to just 7. Some say even fewer privately owned refineries remain operational. California uses special gasoline that most other states can't produce. It's called California reformulated gasoline. Only California refineries make it in large quantities. When California loses refineries, it can't easily import replacement fuel. Few refineries outside California have invested in equipment to produce this special fuel blend. The formula requires specific additives and processing. Building that capability costs hundreds of millions of dollars. Nobody wants to spend that money when California is actively trying to eliminate gasoline vehicles. California plans to ban the sale of new gasoline-powered cars by 2035. Energy companies see the writing on the wall. Why invest billions in California refining when the market will disappear in 10 years? The state consumes 1.4 million barrels of crude oil per day. After the closures, refining capacity drops to 1.34 million barrels per day. That's a huge gap. Huge. And demand isn't falling fast enough to close it. California already imports nearly 400 million barrels a year. Those imports will have to increase dramatically. That means more tanker ships, higher costs, greater emissions. Everything California says it wants to avoid. Governor Newsom signed legislation requiring refineries to keep massive inventories on hand. Building the storage tanks costs $35 million each and takes 10 years. Valero took a $1.1 billion impairment charge for its California operations. That tells you how bad the economics have become. California's oil production has dropped 70% since 1986. Drilling permits collapsed from over 2,000 per year to barely 100 in 2023 and 2024. The 25-year well life cycle means production will fall 15% annually. Phillips 66 CEO Mark Lashier said the Los Angeles refinery was originally designed to process in state California crude production. That production has declined 75%. The refinery lost its feedstock advantage. Energy expert Edward Ring warned California's gasoline infrastructure is at its breaking point. One blip, he said, and we'll have gas lines. In February 2025, a fire blocked refinery repairs. Gas prices immediately jumped across California, Arizona, and Nevada. That was just a preview. Texas lost its largest urban refinery. The LyondellBasell Houston facility is gone. 263,776 barrels per day of capacity permanently shut down in January 2025. LyondellBasell announced closure plans back in 2022. The company wanted to focus on plastic pellet manufacturing instead of refining. They tried to sell the facility. Nobody wanted it. The Houston refinery produced about 140,000 barrels per day of gasoline and 100,000 barrels per day of diesel. Much of that was exported. Now the Gulf Coast has to find other sources. Texas is the nation's refining powerhouse, but even Texas isn't immune to closures. The LyondellBasell shutdown shows that aging infrastructure and weak profit margins can kill refineries anywhere. The closure happened despite strong fuel margins in the years leading up to it. LyondellBasell extended the shutdown timeline to accommodate those margins. But eventually, the company decided the refinery didn't fit its long-term strategy. The Houston refinery had operated for decades. It employed hundreds of workers directly. Thousands more jobs depended on the facility through contractors and suppliers. All of those jobs disappeared when the refinery closed. Refinery closures ripple through entire communities. Local businesses lose customers. Tax revenue falls. Property values near the facility often decline. The economic damage extends far beyond the refinery gates. LyondellBasell cited long-term shifts in fuel demand. rising renewable energy adoption, electric vehicle growth. The company saw the future and decided refining didn't fit. Motiva's Port Arthur refinery is now America's largest at 640,500 barrels per day. But that doesn't replace what Houston lost. Different locations, different markets, different customers. The Houston closure tightened fuel supplies along the Gulf Coast. Gasoline and diesel inventories fell to their lowest levels since 2000. Export capacity dropped, and other refineries had to pick up the slack. Pennsylvania suffered a devastating wave of refinery closures that almost destroyed the East Coast fuel supply. 3 major refineries announced shutdowns within months of each other in 2011 and 2012. The Marcus Hook refinery closed in December 2011. The ConocoPhillips Trainer refinery shut down in September 2011. And Sunoco announced plans to close its massive Philadelphia refinery in July 2012. Together, these 3 facilities represented 50% of East Coast refining capacity. The Philadelphia refinery alone processed 335,000 barrels per day. It was the largest refinery on the East Coast. Senator Bob Casey called for emergency hearings. The closures threatened to spike energy prices across the entire Northeast. Nearly 3,000 direct jobs were at risk. Another 5,000 to 6,000 contractor and supplier jobs hung in the balance. The Energy Information Administration issued reports warning about severe impacts. Ultra-low sulfur diesel would be the most challenging product to replace. Limited alternative supply sources existed. Transportation constraints would hamper product delivery throughout Pennsylvania and into western New York. The Northeast consumes 85% of America's home heating oil. Pennsylvania refineries provided critical supplies for winter heating. Losing that capacity could mean families unable to afford heat, or worse, unable to find heating oil at any price. The situation was dire enough that the federal government got involved. Energy Secretary Stephen Chu was urged to become personally involved. The administration faced pressure to protect consumers and prevent economic disaster. Philadelphia had a 10.8% unemployment rate at the time. Delaware County faced 8% unemployment. The refinery closures would make everything worse. Ultimately, buyers were found for Trainer and the Philadelphia refinery. Delta Airlines bought Trainer. The Carlyle Group purchased the Philadelphia facility and created Philadelphia Energy Solutions. Marcus Hook converted to a natural gas terminal. But the Philadelphia Energy Solutions refinery exploded and caught fire in June 2019. The facility shut down permanently. Over 1,000 jobs disappeared. The largest source of air pollution in Philadelphia finally stopped. But so did the fuel supply. The Philadelphia closure forced the Northeast to import more fuel. Pipeline capacity became even more critical, and prices became more volatile. PBF Energy's Paulsboro refinery in New Jersey partially shut down in 2020. The company idled most refining units. 250 jobs were cut. Only lubricant and asphalt production continued. The Paulsboro shutdown reduced East Coast refining capacity by another 85,000 barrels per day. PBF integrated Paulsboro with its Delaware City refinery to maintain efficiency. New York doesn't have operating refineries anymore. The state lost its last major facility years ago. Now it depends entirely on imports and supplies from other states. The shutdown of Pennsylvania refineries hit New York especially hard. Pipelines that supplied western New York originated in the Philadelphia refinery complex. When those refineries closed, New York faced serious supply problems. Transportation constraints hampered product delivery into western New York. The infrastructure was designed to move fuel from Philadelphia. Reversing those flows or finding alternative routes proved difficult. Ultra-low sulfur diesel became the hardest product to replace. Few alternative supply sources existed outside the Gulf Coast. And getting Gulf Coast diesel to upstate New York required major logistical changes. New York now imports fuel through New York Harbor. Tankers and barges bring gasoline, diesel, and heating oil from other regions. That adds cost, creates delay, and makes supply vulnerable to disruptions. When refineries in Philadelphia were threatened with closure, New York officials worried about price spikes. The Energy Information Administration warned of likely price volatility due to longer supply chains. Home heating oil is critical for New York, The Northeast consumes 85% of total U.S. home heating oil. Any supply reduction hits New York families hard, especially in winter. The state tried to increase pipeline capacity to bring in more fuel, but environmental opposition blocked those projects. So New York remains dependent on waterborne imports and whatever can flow through existing pipelines. Arizona doesn't have refineries. The state gets 33% of its gasoline from California. Another large portion comes from Texas through a pipeline that's already at maximum capacity. California's refinery closures directly threaten Arizona's fuel supply. When Phillips 66 and Valero close, Arizona loses access to nearly 310,000 barrels per day of production. Governor Katie Hobbs sent a letter to California Governor Gavin Newsom warning about the impact. She's a Democrat. Nevada Governor Joe Lombardo, a Republican, co-signed the letter. Both warned that California's regulations would cause fuel shortages and price increases in their states. Newsom signed the legislation anyway. He said it would save consumers money. But his own California Energy Commission warned the rules may artificially create shortages in downstream markets. That means Arizona and Nevada. Arizona uses California's special reformulated gasoline in Phoenix. The EPA mandated it, so Arizona can't easily switch to fuel from other states. The state is locked into California's supply system. The El Paso pipeline that brings Texas fuel to Arizona already runs at capacity. There's no spare capacity anywhere. If California supply drops, Arizona has nowhere else to turn. Stillwater Associates analyzed the impact. California supplies about 33% of Arizona's gasoline market. When those California refineries close, where does Arizona find replacement fuel? Trucking fuel from other states is expensive. Arizona population grew 1.3% from 2023 to 2024. Demand keeps rising while supply falls. Arizona's tourism and trucking industries depend on reliable diesel supplies. If diesel shortages hit, the entire economy suffers. Goods can't move, tourists can't travel, business grinds down. Nevada faces even worse problems than Arizona. The state gets 88% of its gasoline from California. Reno depends 100% on California fuel. When California refineries close, Nevada has almost no backup options. The pipelines from California to Nevada already run at maximum capacity. There's no room to bring in more fuel from elsewhere. Governor Joe Lombardo called California's policies misguided. He said Nevada residents shouldn't have to pay for California's regulatory choices. His warning fell on deaf ears. Nevada uses the same California fuel blend as Phoenix. Very few refineries outside California produce it. That means Nevada can't just order gasoline from Texas or Oklahoma. When California refineries had maintenance problems in February 2025, gas prices jumped across Nevada. That was routine maintenance. Permanent closures will cause much bigger problems. Nevada's population grew 1.7% from 2023 to 2024. It's one of the fastest growing states. More people means more fuel demand. Las Vegas and Reno drive Nevada's economy. Hotels, casinos, restaurants all depend on deliveries requiring diesel trucks. A fuel shortage cripples the entire tourism industry. Nevada has limited options. The state could try to import fuel by truck from other states, but that costs a fortune. Or Nevada could build new pipelines. But that takes years and faces environmental opposition. Oregon gets much of its gasoline from Washington refineries. But Washington refineries source feedstock through California supply chains. California's closures ripple north. Oregon Governor Tina Kotek voiced urgent alarm over potential fallout. Portland's fuel distribution network has vulnerabilities. The state has limited storage, just 10 to 15 days worth. That's half the national average. Phillips 66 announced plans to sell its Ferndale, Washington refinery. If that facility closes or converts, Oregon loses a critical supply source. Shipping times from Asia approach a month. Import premiums add $40 per barrel. Oregon consumers already pay more than the national average. Gas averages $3.70 per gallon compared to $2.95 nationally. If Washington refineries follow California's path, experts warn prices could triple. A typical driver consuming 480 gallons annually would see fuel bills jump from $1,776 to $3,840 to $4,800. That's a $2,000 to $3,000 annual hit per family. School bus drivers, truckers, and low-income households face the brunt. There's no robust backup plan. Oregon hasn't built the infrastructure to handle large-scale imports. Broader economic impacts include strain on Portland's ports, job losses in related industries, reduced competitiveness for Oregon businesses, higher costs across the board. Washington has 5 major refineries in the Puget Sound area. They process over 650,000 barrels per day. But closures and conversions threaten to cut that capacity in half. Shell sold its Puget Sound refinery to HollyFrontier in 2021 for $350 million. HollyFrontier became H.F. Sinclair. The facility processes 149,000 barrels per day. Marathon operates the former Shell Anacortes refinery at 145,000 barrels per day. Phillips 66 runs the Ferndale refinery. BP has a Cherry Point facility. U.S. Oil operates a smaller refinery. These refineries historically processed Alaskan crude oil, but Alaskan production has declined. By 2017, Alaskan crude accounted for only 35% of crude refined in Washington. 34% came from Canada, 24% from North Dakota by rail. Washington refineries face the same pressures as California: climate regulations, rising costs, declining margins, uncertain long-term demand due to electric vehicle adoption. Phillips 66's California closures triggered broader asset sales. The Ferndale refinery is on the market. If it closes or converts to renewable diesel, Washington loses critical capacity. The Olympic Pipeline connects Washington refineries to markets throughout the Pacific Northwest. When refinery capacity falls, everyone downstream suffers. Washington tried to block crude oil trains to reduce risks, but that also limited refineries' ability to source cheaper crude. Now refineries face higher costs and uncertain futures. A 2010 explosion at the Tesoro Anacortes refinery killed 7 workers. Safety concerns have plagued the industry. Regulators struggle to oversee highly technical operations with limited staff. Louisiana is a Gulf Coast refining powerhouse, but even Louisiana has seen closures. The Calcasieu refining Lake Charles facility idled during the COVID pandemic. Louisiana's geographic position gives it advantages: access to Gulf Coast crude production, proximity to export terminals, strong logistics networks. But aging facilities still face pressure. The LyondellBasell Houston closure affects Louisiana refineries. Gulf Coast refiners compete for feedstock and markets. When one major player exits, others have to adjust. Louisiana refineries produce gasoline, diesel, and jet fuel for domestic and export markets. Any capacity loss tightens the entire system. Prices become more volatile. Supply becomes less reliable. Hurricane damage is a constant threat. Major storms can knock out multiple refineries simultaneously. Louisiana needs spare capacity to handle those disruptions. Closures eliminate that buffer. The Chalmette refinery near New Orleans processes 185,000 barrels per day. It's owned by PBF Energy now. The facility handles both light and heavy crude oil. Louisiana's refining industry employs thousands of workers, supports thousands more contractor and supplier jobs, generates massive tax revenue. Losing refineries hurts the entire state economy. Wyoming's HollyFrontier Cheyenne refinery shut down in 2020. The 48,000 barrel per day facility couldn't compete anymore. HollyFrontier announced plans to convert Cheyenne into a renewable diesel plant. The conversion should be complete by 2022, but that means Wyoming lost conventional refining capacity. Wyoming produces oil, but the state has limited refining capacity relative to production. Most Wyoming crude gets shipped to refineries in other states. The Cheyenne closure forced Wyoming to import more gasoline and diesel from elsewhere. That increased transportation costs, made supply less reliable, created vulnerability during disruptions. Wyoming's small population means fuel demand is relatively low, but the state's geography presents challenges. Long distances between population centers, limited pipeline infrastructure, harsh winter weather. Rural Wyoming communities depend on reliable fuel supplies. Ranching operations need diesel. Trucking companies need diesel. Heating oil is critical in winter. Any supply disruption has outsized impacts. The renewable diesel conversion doesn't help Wyoming consumers. That fuel gets sold to California and other states with renewable fuel mandates. Wyoming loses its local refinery but doesn't benefit from the replacement. Other small refining states face similar pressures. New Mexico saw Marathon close its Gallup refinery. North Dakota's Dickinson facility converted to renewable diesel. Small refineries serving local markets can't survive. Wyoming tried to support its energy industry through favorable regulations and tax policies. But global market forces overwhelm state-level efforts. When refining margins collapse, small facilities close first. The Cheyenne shutdown shows that no state is safe. Even energy-producing states lose refineries. The transition away from fossil fuels hits oil states especially hard. Jobs disappear, tax revenue falls. Local economies struggle. New Mexico. New Mexico lost its Gallup refinery when Marathon Petroleum decided to close the 26,000-barrel-per-day facility. The small refinery couldn't compete in the new market environment. Marathon announced the closure as part of broader restructuring. The company was shutting down or converting multiple refineries across the country. Gallup was too small and too isolated to survive. The Gallup refinery served local and regional markets. It provided jobs in a rural area that desperately needed them. The closure hit the community hard. New Mexico produces oil and natural gas, but like Wyoming, the state has limited refining capacity relative to production. Most New Mexico crude gets shipped elsewhere for processing. Losing the Gallup refinery made New Mexico more dependent on imported gasoline and diesel. Trucks have to haul fuel longer distances. That increases costs and reduces reliability. Rural New Mexico communities face challenges similar to rural Wyoming. Long distances between towns, limited infrastructure, harsh weather in winter. Reliable fuel supply is critical for survival. The Navajo Nation is located near Gallup. Many tribal members worked at the refinery or in related industries. The closure eliminated jobs and economic opportunities for Native Americans who already face high unemployment. New Mexico tried to diversify its energy economy. The state invested in renewable energy, supported oil and gas production. But refineries kept closing anyway. Market forces overwhelmed state efforts. Small refineries serving local markets can't achieve the economies of scale needed to compete. When profit margins shrink, small facilities die first. That leaves rural areas vulnerable to supply disruptions. Delaware's story is tied to Pennsylvania's crisis. The state has one major refinery. PBF Energy's Delaware City facility processes 190,000 barrels per day. Delaware City is the largest refinery on the East Coast now that Philadelphia Energy Solutions is gone. The facility became even more critical when PBF partially shut down its Paulsboro, New Jersey refinery. PBF integrated the two refineries. Paulsboro now produces intermediate products that get sent to Delaware City for final processing. The arrangement increased efficiency. But it also made Delaware City more important to regional supply. Delaware City can process heavy and sour crude oils. That's rare for East Coast refineries. The flexibility helps Delaware City compete. It can source crude from Canada, the Middle East, or domestic production. But Delaware City faces the same long-term pressures as other refineries. Weak demand growth, rising regulatory costs, uncertain future due to electric vehicle adoption. The facility could be vulnerable if market conditions worsen. Delaware depends heavily on the refinery for jobs and tax revenue. New Castle County would suffer if Delaware City closed. the entire East Coast would lose critical refining capacity. Delaware City had a major outage in January 2016. The refinery lost power during a severe winter storm. The shutdown caused toxic emissions and delayed the restart. PBF moved up a planned turnaround to address operational issues. The outage showed how dependent the region is on this one facility. When Delaware City goes down, the entire East Coast feels it. The refinery accounts for about 15% of East Coast gasoline production. Any extended outage or permanent closure would spike prices throughout the Northeast. Import capacity couldn't make up the difference quickly enough. Delaware is now home to the last major operating refinery complex on the East Coast. That concentration creates huge risk. One explosion, one fire, one bankruptcy, and the entire region loses its primary fuel source.